August 26th at 4:30 p.m. and I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'd like to acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation. A notice to attendees that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino YouTube channel. A notice to virtual attendees to sign up for public comment and question period using the Q&A function in Zoom. To register, participants are required to enter their full name, residential address, and the agenda item they wish to speak to. Agenda item 2.1, I'd like to move from the chair that the pursuant to section 11(1) of the District of Tofino Meeting Procedures Bylaw number 1229, 2016, the temporary facility provided for the public to watch and hear the August 26, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting is to be held in the multipurpose room at the Tofino Community Hall located at 351 Arnott Road in Tofino, BC. And that the meeting is to be held electronically via Zoom and live broadcasted via the District of Tofino YouTube channel. Seeing no objections, that motion is carried. Adoption of the agenda 3.1. I move from the chair that the August 26, 2024 Committee of the Whole agenda be adopted. Seeing no objections, that motion is carried. Agenda item 4.1, minutes of the Special Committee of the Whole meeting held June 12, 2024. I move from the chair that the minutes of the Special Committee of the Whole meeting held June 2024 be adopted. Seeing no objections, that motion is carried. Agenda item 5, comment on agenda items.
Thank you, Chair Sloman. I will now make an open call for comments to both members of the public present in the gallery and those participating online. For those in the gallery who wish to speak, please raise your hand. If there is anyone attending online that would like to make a comment, you can do so now using the Q&A function. Before making a comment, you will need to state your name, your address, and the agenda item you are speaking to. I will now do a call, calling once, calling twice, calling 3 times. There are no comments at this time, Chair Sloman.
And delegation?
No delegations.
Okay. Moving on to agenda item 7.1, correspondences. We have a correspondence from the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation regarding consideration of limits to growth policy. I'd like to open this up to council for questions or comments on this.
I'll just ask if staff has had dealings with TFN since this matter, on this matter, or should we delay that to the next section?
Through the chair, council may wish to speak to the correspondence during the limits to growth discussion. There is some reference in the council report, as you have seen, to the developments that the nation is wishing to occur. So I think that would likely be the most appropriate time for discussion, but if council would like to chat about correspondence now, that's also fine.
That's fine.
Seeing that no other questions or comments, I will move on to agenda item 8.1, presentations and reports. We have a 2025-2028 permissive tax exemption report from corporate services.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Laura Morehouse, Manager of Financial Services. I'm here to discuss the 2025 to 2028 permissive tax exemptions today with you. So just a couple of things, just an overview of what I'll be presenting today. Quick overview of the tax exemptions, what types they are, and how those are laid out for us. I'll provide a summary of the applications that we received. We'll review the financial impacts, and then I'll just outline the next steps in the tax exemption process. So council may be aware that the community charter provides for 2 types of exemptions. The first being statutory exemptions. These are automatic exemptions from property tax provided by both federal and provincial legislation. So municipal councils don't have any discretion in statutory exemptions. Examples of these would be hospitals, public schools, libraries, places of worship, and municipal properties. The community charter also provides in section 224 for permissive tax exemptions, and these are granted at the sole discretion of council. Some examples of permissive tax exemptions would be museums, not-for-profit seniors housing, and the properties located around places of worship that wouldn't be eligible for statutory exemptions. To provide for a permissive tax exemption, a bylaw must be adopted by October 31st and submitted to BC assessment. So as I mentioned, permissive tax exemptions are offered at the sole discretion of council. Local governments do have the ability to provide exemptions for periods up to 10 years. The district's current policy specifies that we provide for a 4-year term, and then we ask applicants to reapply. We do accept off-cycle applications, and the policy outlines that applications must be received by August 15th in a given year to be considered for a tax exemption in the following year. So for the upcoming term, applications were due by July 31st, which gives staff time to process all of the applications and set the timeline to make sure that everything is submitted to BC assessment by that October 31st deadline. There are 9 eligible properties included in the report to council. 8 applications were received, and one of the eligible properties does not require an application. I'll talk about that in a little bit. We did receive 1 application that is currently ineligible for a permissive tax exemption. In order for a property to be eligible, or for the application itself to be eligible, applicants need to submit complete applications, any current lease agreements within their property, and financial statements for both the applicant organization and for any lessees. And applications or call for applications went out to all those who are currently receiving permissive tax exemptions under the current bylaw, and to properties who have expressed interest in applying in the last year. So as I mentioned, we received 8 eligible applications, the first being from the Anglican Synod Diocese of BC, and this is for St. Columba Anglican Church. And this is for the property surrounding the actual place of worship itself, which would be covered under the statutory exemption. This property also has a portion of their property that is not exempt from under the permissive tax exemption bylaw. A similar situation for Bishop of Victoria for the property, for the portion of the property surrounding St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church that's not covered under the statutory exemption. We received an application from Tla-o-qui-aht Sound Community Theatre, and that's for the portion of the municipal hall that is leased to the theatre for use. This is a new application from the Royal Canadian Legion, so they were not included in the current bylaw. And this application does not include the portion of their property that's leased to Vancouver Island Regional Library. That portion is exempt under a statutory exemption. TELUS Communications is the property that doesn't require an application. The district has a statutory right of way for a portion of the property on 2nd and Neil that's owned by TELUS Communications that we use for a parking area, and as it's for district use, it receives 100% exemption. We also received an application from the Tofino Bible Fellowship, and this is for an affordable housing unit on Abraham Drive. Tofino Destination Management Association applied for the Tourism Tofino Visitor Center on Pacific Rim Highway. Tofino Housing Corporation submitted an application for the Mount Colnet Senior Affordable Living unit. And finally, the Tofino Salmon Enhancement Society for the salmon hatchery at the end of Sharp Road. We did receive an application from Island Health for a property that they just purchased on First Street. Currently, this property is ineligible for a tax exemption under the current policy. The intent by Island Health is to build a facility on that property that would have both staff housing as well as a space for the district-run community children's center. Under the current policy, children's centers or daycares are not included in the definition of educational institutions. But we also don't have a written agreement in place with Island Health confirming the use of that property once the facility is built. So currently it's not eligible. When we look at the financial impacts of permissive tax exemptions, these are all estimates. We use calculations to make the calculations. We use 2024 assessment values and the current tax rates. And then we provide for increases based on what's included in the current adopted financial plan. Our policy outlines that the total amount of exemptions granted cannot exceed a maximum of 2% of the current year's municipal taxation. So this is an overview of what the estimated 2025 exemptions would be given all of the property's assessments. And you can see at the bottom of the table there, the exemption limit for 2025 is 132,803. So we are well within that limit. And then applying the increases based on the financial plan, these three numbers are the estimated tax exemptions for the future years of the exemptions. So when we look at next steps, as we mentioned, the bylaw needs to be, would need to be adopted before October 31st. So if council were to approve staff's recommendation today, we would be bringing forward the permissive tax exemption bylaw to the September 10th regular council meeting for first three readings, and then we would be providing public notice in alignment with the community charter. And I do have the recommendation here, but I'll pause for questions.
Okay, does council have any questions for Ms. Morehouse? Councilor Anderson?
I just had one on the limit. How do you determine the limit?
So the policy outlines that 2% of municipal taxation is the limit. So we look at what the estimated municipal tax amount is, and we just calculate 2%.
Is that a district bylaw that sets that limit, or is that a provincial?
It's included in the permissive tax exemption policy.
Thanks.
Councilor Steer, you have a question?
Yes, thank you through the chair. I may have missed it, but Laura, thank you for the report, by the way. The Island Health property, now the ineligible, was that for the new property that was purchased or for the current site of the daycare and the public health facility? I noticed that neither one of them are on there. Are both of them ineligible? Because if my understanding with the daycare, it is a district use. Would that not be available as a tax exemption for that particular property?
Thank you, Councilor Steer, through the chair. So the property where the district daycare is currently in operations has a statutory exemption for the portion that is used for Island Health as well, because it's in the whole facility. Actually, the daycare also falls within that statutory exemption. If it didn't fall within the statutory exemption, then it would receive a permissive tax exemption, given that it's being used for district services. So the application in question is for the new property on First Street across the street that they purchased.
Great, thank you so much.
Any further questions or comments? Okay, I will read the motion then. I move that the staff be authorized to prepare a tax exemption bylaw for taxation years 2025 to 2028 that include the properties associated with the following applicants. the Anglican Synod Diocese of British Columbia, the Bishop of Victoria, the Catholic Church, the Clackamas Sound Community Theatre, the Royal Canadian Legion, TELUS Communications, Tofino Bible Fellowship, Tofino Destination Management Organization, Tofino Housing Corporation, and the Tofino Salmon Enhancement Society. Seconded by Councilor Thomas. All in favor? Motion is carried. And then moving on to agenda item 8.2, Recreation and Parks Master Plan, a verbal report from Community Service.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Cindy Hutchison and I'm the Manager of Community Programs, and I will be providing a verbal report on the Recreation and Parks Master Plan project. As well as I will also be introducing you and the community to a consultant group that will guide us through the process. But first, why a Recreation and Parks Master Plan? So simply put, the Recreation and Parks Master Plan is intended to chart a course for community recreation and parks services that defines and guides policies, priorities, and actions in the next 5 to 10 years. The plan will identify existing resources and emerging trends, highlight gaps in the current framework, and provide goals to improve recreation services to the community. The Recreation and Parks Master Plan will also act as a guide for council as well as staff to help prioritize projects related to parks, trails, and recreation facilities and services. So a bit of background, the Recreation and Parks Master Plan was approved in the 2023 to 2027 financial plan and was scheduled to begin in 2023. However, due to limitations in staff capacity, the project was deferred to begin in 2024. The project is entirely funded through taxation, and the request for proposal process opened May 1st and ended May 30th, 2024, and in total 6 submissions were received. The project was awarded upon review of all the submissions. RC Strategies was identified as the successful proponent. Their expertise in recreation, sports, parks, trails, and culture planning and policy development was clearly seen in their proposal. A couple of key takeaways that I'd like to note for Council and Mayor is that RC Strategies, passion and curiosity in exploring the role that recreation and culture services can play in supporting public health, reducing social, physical, and systemic barriers to participation, and furthering truth and reconciliation calls to action was very clearly identified in their proposal. Combined with professional environment and recreational consultants, or PERC, in 2016, RC Strategies combined experience encompasses over 3,000 consulting projects with over 40 plus years of experience. RCS maintains 12 full-time employees and contractors located in BC and Alberta and has staff projects across Canada. So without further ado, I will be passing over the presentation to Steve from RC Strategies to introduce the Tofino Recreation and Parks Master Plan. He will be joining via Zoom, so he will share his screen and take it from there. And maybe I'll leave it questions for after, if that's appropriate.
Great. Thanks so much, Cindy. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm just going to share my screen. And that was a fantastic intro, Cindy. So I appreciate that. We don't usually get our tires pumped quite as much as that in an intro. So that was great. And yeah, really awesome for us to be kicking off this project, and wish I could be there in person. Tonight certainly will be there a bunch as we get rolling on the project. But just wanted to introduce myself and our team to you, and kind of start a bit of a conversation, which is really how I think of really the outset of any project like this is with councils. It is the start of a conversation, as it will be with the community as well. So I'll have a couple slides just to further color out a little bit more about our team here and who's kind of going to be doing what on the project. We'll spend a couple minutes just on work plan, some of the preliminary work that our team with administration has got going to kick the project off, review where we're at with community engagement, and then certainly happy to take any questions at the end of the presentation here. So Cindy probably covered this off way better than I could, but really I think just to add to what she had started with there, I mean, we really play within the sport, rec, culture, parks, trails realm. That is the kind of the sandbox, so to speak, that we play in. And I think that gives us a lot of really good insight into different service delivery models, certainly trends. The kind of the slide there on sort of how we're looking at equity, diversity, inclusion, and environmental issues within specific to parks and recreation. Not many firms have the opportunity to really kind of dig into it with that parks and recreation lens. And we do have team members kind of all over the place. And I would just add something else we're really quite proud of is just the volunteer time that we put back into the sector through our various volunteer roles. We have about 12 to 15 staff, and I'm one of 5 partners in the firm. So we're a reasonably small but mighty shop. Just a sampling of some of our other projects that we have ongoing or recently wrapped up. So we work in a whole range or realm of different communities on a number of different projects within this planning space related to parks, rec, sport, culture, trails, etc. So again, I think this really gives us some good insight into a lot of topics within the subject matter area here. Just want to spend a couple minutes on our team, just so you all kind of understand a little bit who we've kind of brought into the fray here to help support us. So my name's Steve Sluda, and I am the consulting team project lead. And really my role with our team is to just coordinate the efforts of a whole bunch of other folks. And then ultimately I'm responsible for the project deliverables. But a couple folks that you may see along the way here, Shannon Gordon with the Whistler Center, WCS, is our engagement lead. So she's been actively involved in working with the group on getting the engagement kicked off, and I'll touch a little bit more on that in a few slides here. Fiona Bell with our firm is our research lead, so she's in charge of doing a lot of the the non-engagement related research and analysis. And then we have a few other firms as well that are on the team. Jeff Urbach with an outfit called the Arts Consulting Group. So they bring some very detailed arts and culture subject matter expertise to our team that kind of even supplements a little bit of what we have in terms of expertise in that area. And then we also have Stantec on board as sort of a technical facility expertise, costing down the road when we get to the implementation plan, those sort of things. So we also have an in-house graphic designer and a GIS specialist as well. So a bunch of different folks will be working on the project. You'll probably see me the most, but we have a fairly diverse group in terms of skill sets. This is probably really hard to see for those in the room here, so I apologize for that. But in terms of our kind of work plan and timing, really the key thing to know about this is that we're in this first phase for project startup right now, which is really entails collecting a whole bunch of background information and assembling a whole bunch of data, which Cindy and the team have been just absolutely fantastic at getting. We've had a lot of requests for some background information, and we know that's a really big task. The other really key element of this first phase here is the development of the communications and engagement plan, which I'll touch on in a sec. And then that's going to start to transition into phases 2A and 2B, which is us doing a whole bunch of research and engagement to learn about the state of parks and recreation and culture in the community, as well as what people see as being kind of gaps and needs and opportunities and all of that. So we're going to launch into that here shortly. Work on doing that research and engagement here through the balance of mostly the fall. And then once we get kind of later into the year, early into the new year, that's when we'll really start digging into some of the strategic direction setting, developing the master plan, and working towards having the project completed in spring 2025. So we have a lot of work to do, and we're really pumped to do that. But I think we're certainly on schedule right now, and There's always a few variables with your availability as council to get in front of you when we want to check in, but we're on track to hit project completion by spring 2025. Excuse me. So just a very quick update on current status. So working with, as I mentioned, with staff to get all the background information that we need, working on the engagement plan, which will be a working kind of living, breathing document. Facility visits. So I believe we had the gentleman from Stantec out there today looking at indoor facilities. I'll be out there sometime in the next month looking at your parks and trails. And we've initiated the research elements of the project as well. Community engagement. So number of elements of community engagement, but in terms of kind of our overarching approach. Sorry, did it look like someone tried to cut in there? Can you guys still hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. We did lose you for like a minute.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
Where
Beginning
did
of
you
the-
lose me?
At the beginning of the last slide.
This one here, the
Yeah.
current status.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll just maybe recap this. Really, where we are with the project is just gathering up the background information, developing the engagement plan, and then facility visits, and we've kicked off some of the research there. So apologies that I kicked out there for a sec, but really all this to say that we've made pretty good progress, and we're, as I mentioned earlier, we're on track. Community engagement. So I just wanted to share a little bit of our kind of philosophy for the project behind community engagement here. A number of sort of fundamentals of how we're looking to engage with your community is we want to use a variety of tactics. So, sometimes with these processes, there's in any community a number of special interest groups or certainly strong opinions on certain topics, and I suspect your community has a little bit of that too. So we want to make sure that we're gathering up perspectives from a whole bunch of different folks in a number of different ways. We want to be really clear about what the project is and also what it isn't. So a master plan is a fairly high level strategic plan. There are some tactical components to it, but it's not going to get totally down into the weeds of should the lockers be blue or red in the facility or anything like that. So we want to be really transparent about kind of what a master plan is. And for those that are familiar with IEP2, our engagement will mostly occur around that consult and evolve levels along the IEP2 spectrum of public participation, which is the graphic on the right there. So yeah, for those that are interested in that, that's kind of where most of our engagement will kind of play and kind of toggle between is consult and involve. Sorry, not evolve, involve. The specific tactics that we're looking to use, as I mentioned, want to gather input from folks in a number of different ways. So we're certainly going to make use of the Talk Tofino, the online platform. We're going to have a public survey that we'll use to gather broad perspectives from residents on a whole bunch of different topics related to recreation parks. We're going to be at some community events, and we're just kind of working out the details on which and when and where and all of that. We're going to have a number of discussions, virtual and in person, with community organization representatives and other interest groups and stakeholders in the community. We're working with staff around a bit of a plan to reach out to your First Nations partners. And we're also going to have a few different forms of youth engagement too. And we're looking at maybe an activity wall or kind of a coloring book for younger children, something a little bit more dynamic. So a bit of detail to be worked out on all of these things, but again, looking to have a wide array of engagement opportunities. And then there's a number of other elements of research that we're going to look at doing too, everything from spatial analysis and mapping to benchmarking and looking at trends and population and demographics. And we have some cool data analytics tools that we can apply to a community, look at your bookings and programming data and all of that. So at the end of the day, we take all of that research and engagement, and it kind of goes into this big information funnel, and we kind of use that to start thinking about some strategic directions, and ultimately the master plan gets developed based on that. How will we engage with you as council? Really, we see 3 formal checkpoints, and certainly it could be more if you would like, but we're having an initial chat here today at Project Startup. In a few months, once we've completed the first round of engagement and all the research, we're hoping to come before you and present all of that, or at least key findings of all of that, and potentially at that point in time, test some preliminary recommendations or some big moves or focus areas, kind of where that research and engagement is kind of maybe potentially leading to. And then once we have a draft master plan, kind of late winter, early spring, we would come back to you at that point in time too, to review a more thorough, structured master plan. And again, we can adjust this a little bit as we go along, and certainly if we need another engagement with council, we're flexible around that as well. So that's kind of my brief overview of where we're at and where we're going. And sorry again that the internet kicked out there, and happy to take any questions or comments.
Okay, I see Councillor Steer has a question. I'll start with him, and then Councillor Anderson after.
Great. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate the presentation. We've been very much looking forward to the master plan as it to be implemented. And not so much question other than a couple of comments. And first, once again, thank you for the presentation to clearly outline the framework and the ideology of sort of what you're working through. One of the things, obviously, for council and the community in general is that this is a very usable document, something that we don't want to be sitting on the shelf to gather dust. So really appreciate the approach that I think you're taking to make it a much more tangible piece of work for us. There's everything from budget considerations to all of those types of implementation that you have alluded to. And the other, in terms of just quickly, in terms of the engagement process, we just got an email today. We have a Recreation Advisory Committee, and there is a tentative meeting scheduled for September 5th. And I would highly invite your team to participate in there. We'd like to actively involve our Recreation Advisory Committee in these discussions. I think they have will have a lot of value to be able to add to the work that you'll be doing. And then last but not least, of course, our community is not opinionated on recreation things in here. You'll find that at all. They're very low key about this. So anyways, thank you once again for that, and good luck on the project.
Yeah, and sorry, through the chair, if I could just quickly respond to Councillor, sorry, is it Steer? Did I get that right? Okay, yeah, thanks for the comment. And I neglected to mention that we are tentatively scheduled to be before the advisory committee at that September, I think it was 5th meeting. So we do have that built into our work plan to check in with them in a similar way to council as well, and engage them kind of throughout the process. So thanks for reminding me on that.
Okay, and Councillor Anderson, and then followed by Mayor Law.
Thanks again for this, and I'm looking forward to working through this with the community. I'm too very interested in the engagement process. I think that would be crucial to get community buy-in, to feel like that everyone's been heard. So I'm just curious how you are identifying the stakeholder groups, and particularly interested in your outreach to seniors, because they don't necessarily engage online or by some of the other methods you may be reaching out.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, through the chair, the stakeholder group identification is something we're in the middle of doing that right now with our engagement lead Shannon and staff. So certainly, yeah, note that we want to be as diverse as we can with who we talk to. So I don't know if you have any kind of specific folks we need to talk to, I would just encourage you to pass that on to Cindy there, and we'll add them to the list. Specific to seniors or older adults, for sure, that's an important cohort for us to talk to, and I would say we're going to be looking to do that in 2 primary ways. One would be through the public survey, and beyond just online, we'll have paper copy options available as well, and we'll make sure that we get that, have a number of pickup locations for those. And then we would also look through the stakeholder discussions to engage with seniors directly, or organizations that work with seniors in the community. So those are a couple ways, but I mean, we're all, as I said, we're kind of in the middle of planning this all out right now. So we're certainly all ears on ideas to engage with seniors or any other cohorts in the community.
I'm just following up on that. If you're looking for suggestions, the open house format has been fairly successful for district in gathering community ideas and opinions on things with, you know, with some presentation a little bit about what information you're looking for. You can get good feedback that way. Also, you may want to put up a booth at one of our markets or the winter market or something like that. And then you get people that don't necessarily come out specifically to talk about recreation, but you pick up on people that are there anyways. So a couple suggestions.
Yeah, thanks for those. And yeah, we do have a couple pop-up events scheduled, and for later, we do have an open house built in for later on in the process when we have some draft master plan material to test as well. So, but we're, like I said, we're kind of we're in the midst of applying that all out right now. So thanks for the suggestions, and we'll look to see how we can integrate those. Appreciate it.
Well, I am.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Sloman. It's great to have you here, and I'm quite passionate about recreation. I think most people in the room are, and it's been on the books for a long time. So it's great to have you here. I have a comment and a question. My comment is, up until fairly recently, we've had the significant loss of families and youth in Tofino, and up until about 3 years ago, it was about a 75% attrition rate for youth, and a lot of families and youth left town. And I know that recreation was a significant factor in that, according to families. What's happened, I've noticed, in outreach to the community and outreach specifically to youth, is that the outreach is only to the youth that are left. And so it sort of, potentially skews the feedback to towards survivorship bias. Basically, you're missing the youth that would stay, and families that would stay if they could, if they had some maybe perhaps more recreation or education, whatever. So my question is, noting that, and I've noted that in several studies in the last few years, is there a way, do you think, that the outreach can include families and youth that have left, noting that we have a fairly unique demographic and a significant loss of that population?
Yeah, interesting question. Through the chair, it'd be real challenging to do that unless there is a way of identifying specifically who those folks are. And I mean, obviously, there's challenges with getting or even IDing these people and then getting permission to talk to them and all of that. I think off the top of my head, and it's a really interesting question. I think that probably the best approach would be to talk to people that would have some insight into why people are leaving that are still in the community through some of those stakeholder discussions, or even just to test that a little bit through the survey and ask them questions, similar to like, why would you, or what would make you stay in the community, things like that. So yeah, we'll think about that a little bit more. I can't think of any way off the top of my head, but it's a really interesting point.
Thanks. That's all I wanted to bring up. Thank you.
And did anyone else have any questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation, and I look forward to seeing you again at the Recreation Advisory Committee meeting.
Great. Thanks so much for your time, and have a good rest of your meeting.
And now we move on to agenda item 8.3, limits to growth policy, risk. A report from Infrastructure and Public Works Division.
Good evening. Today, I'm going to be presenting the third presentation of hopefully 5 presentations to council on our limits to growth policy. Just a little bit of background before we get started. We began this in late May. Just to talk about it, move forward with potentially developing a policy. We talked at the end of July about allocation options. If we did have water to spare, what kind of uses would we consider? We looked at OCP and housing policy primarily for that. Today, we're going to talk about risk what's the risk of growing anymore, if that's what we decide to do. And then follow up with a draft policy, hopefully in front of council on September 10th. And then hopefully adopt the policy by October 8th. Just to talk a little bit about risk. We are currently operating within a risk envelope to consider maximum day demand. If we were to design a system today, with all the money in the world, we would design it to the NFP standards. We don't have that option. We're working within that risk tolerance. And then we're going to consider additional risks if we operate within the average day demand metric. One of the basic questions here is any additional risk to providing water to our community, is it worth it for housing? I'm going to present 4 risk scenarios and 4 droughts today and talk about potential consequences and some options for council. In terms of financial impacts, there's no financial impact from adopting this policy, but there will be potentially financial impacts in the future on items such as development cost charges if we slow down development, our own source development reviews from receiving application fees from various development applications, and potentially property taxes related to non-market changes. To frame this report, again, and for everybody to remember who's here today, this is not a prediction of the future. It's a way to conceptualize risk. It's a tool for council and community to make some decisions. It helps us to match apples to apples and try to come up with a solution to move forward. The risk report is based on analytic day demand, as we've talked about, is a little bit, which is less conservative than the maximum day demand, but we do have some comfort in that it's our historical use. We can look back 12 years and understand how much water the community uses, and we can helps us look forward a little bit as well. So we can be, even though it is a less conservative number, I think we can be comfortable in using it. The model itself is quite conservative. It doesn't consider conservation, the weekly variations that we see. Our system is more it's just about our system on a weekly basis versus a daily basis because our week goes like this, and so it's better sometimes to look at it that way. We can also make operational adjustments in real time. This model doesn't account for that. And again, it's based on those 2033 peak flow projections, which are projections 10 years out about climate. And so we think those are fairly conservative as well. Risk defined. So I think this is one of the big questions that we've had to struggle with to begin with. And it was defining what is risk in this situation. And what we decided as staff and working with consultants was that it wasn't that we were running out of water. Running out of water is not the risk because we are an active community and we can make changes before we run out of water. And so that would mean the way to do that would be to remove demand from the system. In summertime, when it's our highest demand as lowest flow, the way to remove demand is to reduce the amount of visitors in our community. And so we decided to identify risk as reducing the number of visitors in Tofino through a SOLA declaration. The background on that as well is that in January, we have no problem meeting our water demands for the size of our community. And even if we looked at the low flows, we'd have no problem meeting those demands. And so that's why we chose that rather than running out of water. It's also less dramatic. Before we get into the report and the tables itself, I just wanted to say that as we were talking about adding on risk, I do want to say that we are actually trying to reduce risk on a day-to-day basis in the department. So we've talked about it lots at this table, but leak detection, optimizing our system in terms of operations, maintenance, and looking for non-revenue water issues. We've put in place conservation measures in the last year, including new water rates. We're consistently replacing our infrastructure now with our asset management program, and we're actively looking at future water. So while we're potentially adding risk, we're also trying to find ways to minimize risk, and we don't talk about that as much, and it wasn't the intent of this report, but I wanted to say it. I'm going to get into the tables here. We're probably have to work slowly through them because it takes me a little bit to get my brain wrapped around them. I've spent a couple hours with the McElhaney talking about this. So the first major one we want to talk about is drought frequency. this information was compiled through historical records going back to World War II from the airport, where we define 4 different droughts based on historical weather. So, for example, the top drought there, which is the least impactful drought, you can see that because in the number of consecutive dry days is 32. The one on the bottom is 46. So that's the least impactful drought, but the one that happens most often. And what that's telling you is that in any given year, there's a 20% chance that we'll get that type of drought. It's not going to happen every 5 years. It's just a 20% chance it's going to happen in those 5 years. But the second one down, we see that there's a 5% chance that type of drought, that would be 39 consecutive days of dry weather, is a drought. For the purposes of the report, and this is based off the weather reporting, but also off of how BC drought takes care of this, is that a dry day in Tofino is defined as, I think, any water less than 3.1 millimeters of rain. I say that because our system is actually responsive at 3 millimeters of rain. If we get that, it's less of a dry day. Again, this is also this conservatism built into this model. The reservoir drawdown. So this is going to talk to us a little bit about demand. We start at the top column and go across. So this is our existing average day demand is estimated to be the average day demand, and we added in actually 1 day of maximum day demand in there to actually make it more conservative again. And it's those flows compared to those 2033 projections. Gives us 30 days for, if this is our point, but if our demand is in that first column and our flows are here, it's going to take us 30 days to go from 90% to 50% in our reservoirs. If we have the same situation, but we add 2 cubic meters, it's going to take 19 days for us to go from 90% full to 50% full. And again, we're not talking, we actually went below 50 in last year. So again, more conservative built into this model. Any questions on this one? I didn't explain that as well as I practiced.
I got a comment. I have some questions, comment. Maybe a little critique, but a softer critique on it is, I noted that the study itself didn't include last year, which was a pretty significant year. And it's just to acknowledge that, using the model of 3.1 millimeters as anything below that, it'll dry day for 30 days. Last year wouldn't have shown up because it didn't actually go beyond that. It just stacked them like one after the other, but it didn't actually, really go beyond the 30 days itself because there was a rain period. So
Through the chair, can I go softer button?
what's that? This is for comment. This is for questions.
So it's kind of be able to have a bit.
Please.
So the data we have is based on the committee water master plan. 2023 was an anomaly for many reasons. One was the road closure. There was the amount of conserving we had to do. Plus, it was historically dry, and so it would have felt like a bit of an outlier year. It's the same with this year. This year we've got a ton of rain as well, and so the best we could do for now. And this kind of report we can update as the years go and get better and better at it. But it probably gives us a better look at it, looking back 12 years and picking one specific year to look at. I thought about last year too, and I don't think last year would have fit into any of these. I feel like last year might have been a 1 in 500, or something like that. But we're not there yet. We're just looking at, again, that past data of 70 or 80 years of weather data to look forward. We tried to stay, rather than like suggesting as lay people in this business to say like 0 millimeters of rain is a dry day. We just kept going back to the sources. So in the report, it tells all the sources that we looked at. And we did that because we wanted to keep everything in data that we had and data that we could, that had backup. So that's my soft rebuttal to that concern. I share the same concern as you. I would love to see this 5 years from now when we look at this year's rain and last year, and that average is still gonna be an average.
I just wanted to bring it up because it's pretty obvious. It wasn't in there, but it's pretty obvious.
Any questions, before I move on to more tables?
No, but I can't see Councillor Steer if you.
No questions.
Okay, thank you.
So we used that data, our results of that data to come up with this table, which has the corresponding graph that will be our next slide. And what we did there, we can see moving from left to right, we looked at the severity of the drought, right? So let's just take the top one, that's the least impactful drought, it's the 1 in 5 year drought. We look at how long that drought would take, that's a 32 day drought. And that tells us the days the highway would be closed. And the math is in the report, but basically the math is 32 minus 30 gives you 2 days of the highway would be closed in this scenario. If we add, different volumes of water, the highway would potentially be closed for those length days. Remembering that this is not predicting the future, this is not saying the highway is going to be closed, but if you want to compare these different scenarios and these different droughts, we chose how many days the highway would be closed as that determinant. And so we can see we have the scenarios for each drought, and brings us to this slide. This is a representation of what we just looked at. So that highlighted one on the bottom is what we have currently today. It's showing if we have a drought that is 1 in 5 years, so at least 5 drought, the highway is going to be closed for 2 days. It doesn't mean the drought starts, and the drought would have started a month ago. It's a 30-day drought period, but that would be 2 days. So we can see if we add 50 meters of water, our day goes from 2 to 6, and so on and so forth, up the chart. So for example, the difference between what we are today and what we might be if we could add 100 cubic meters of a day, which is what the report recommends, we end up with 6 days of difference between what is currently existing and what is where we might go. And just understanding that relationship is the same at 6 days, that relationship stays the same, and it's just adding water. So as far as risk is concerned, the difference between now and 100 meters is 6 days of highway closure. So before I get into what's currently on the books in terms of developments and what might be on the books in terms of development, do we want to talk a little bit more about this?
Yes.
Just to be clear, just in case people haven't read the report, or this 2-day closure, 6-day closure is if there is no water conservation measures like we did last year. So last year we were able to reduce our daily consumption down close to 1,700 cubic meters. And if theoretically a drought were to appear on the horizon, stage 2, stage 3, we have shown as a community and as excellent staff and planning that we can reduce our daily consumption down to something that would prevent an actual highway closure with our average daily demand. I just want to make that clear. So this is for the purposes of risk, but in reality, we're not looking at an actual 2-day or 6-day closure. So just wanted
It's a great
that very clear.
Yeah, we should bring that up again. That's what you're reading exactly. This is a model. It's not somewhere to close a highway, but it's a way for us to measure risk against risk. As the previous slide said, we are looking at ways to minimize risk all the time. This is a conservative model as well. So I agree with you.
Councillor Anderson?
Yeah. I'm wondering if that's the best terms to express the risk in days of highway closure. It seems like maybe, occupancy reduction would be a better term to use, because to me, this is something that maybe was thought up by the engineers, and it, you know, it represents a reduction of people coming here to say the highway's closed. But people are gonna think that the highway's gonna close. And I don't think that's the best way to express the risk myself. I don't think people will understand it in the same way as an engineer or people that have delved into the report. So yeah, that's just my comment on it. It's there might be a better way of expressing it.
Yeah, and I appreciate the comment. I take what you say, and I think part of the issue is, like you said, as the engineers and even ourselves, we're not really looking at this in terms of public communication at this point. We're looking at it as the council making a decision, and the decision would be if we're in a situation where our water demand is outstripping our supply, and we're in the middle of August, and we've gone through stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, and we're still looking dry, that we have to make a move as a municipality, and that's likely, it's not for sure, but it's likely declaring a state of local emergency and using our state of local emergency powers, asking the province to restrict, not close, but restrict travel on Highway 4 for the purposes of reducing visitation in order to safeguard our water system. So I think I take your point, and maybe it's reducing travel. The other thing I say that is all theoretical. We think our souls, we won't know what that soul would be until such time as that time comes, and maybe it's that soul looks like something we need to reduce by 50%. And so we're gonna reduce highways travel to something. It's a blunt tool, but it's the only tool we have as far as I understand. We can't turn water off to properties. We have to look at it in another way. We do have powers, and the provincial government have powers, and they're for highway closures, which we've seen over the last couple of years. And obviously, this is not something that happens in a vacuum. We'll be talking to the District of Tofino and the Chamber of Commerce and everybody in the community about it. Again, this is not what this report is about, but back to Mayor Law's comments, this report is about deciding whether we want to grow anymore. That's just the risk that we need to talk about to make that decision. I just want to make very clear that this is not an operational report. That's something different.
Okay.
Okay.
So we looked a little bit at demand. This is from a very high level in terms of development demand. We looked at District of Tofino 124, and speaking with the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation through this process, we've come to understand that the development that they're considering on District of Tofino 124 is between 141 to 227 or so residential units of different typologies, which depending on how you address it, but looking at the numbers that the planning department pulled together for us, probably 42 to 58 meters cubed a day. In existing cube, we have 62 meters cubed not allocated, but in the cube, that's equivalent to 235 units, give or take. That was looking at what the specific developments were and how many units they would produce. And so you add those two numbers together, you get a range of about 104 to 120 cubic meters a day to accommodate all of those units. 377 to 462 units is about 20 years of building for Tofino. And so if we're looking at growing somewhat to address our housing reconciliation goals, 100 or so cubic meters of water will be enough to get us through until hopefully a source water solution or something like that. And so if we're still looking at source water in 20 years, that may be a different discussion, but this gives us some time to think about it. Again, development can speed up. We can go more than 25 units a year, but generally on average, you know, there's years we build a lot, like headwaters. But there's many years, most years we're building around 25 units per year. And so just as a way to say that adding 100 cubic meters of water or so is not the end of the world. Our system can accommodate it using up-to-date demand.
I have a question on that slide if I can.
Yeah.
I was just wondering how, because you mentioned headwaters, how does that come into that calculation?
Headwaters is not, because it's already developed.
So that's already in our average?
Yeah.
Even though we use 2022?
Well, it'll be as we go forward, so if this adds up to 2022, so that the new headwaters and the old headwaters wouldn't have been in the state for demand. The problem is that they always say building the airplane after flying it, and we can't stop, so we're always trying to be as far ahead as we can, but it's difficult.
On the district lot 134. What was I going to say now? What time frame are we looking at for those building those units?
I mean, I can't speak to the nation, but I can say that we haven't received a development application yet. But I do know they're talking to the province actively, and I do know they're talking to development corporation, a development organization as well, to start developing what would be in the end for us an OCP update, a zoning bylaw change. Obviously, those take time, we know that, so I would say we'd be lucky to get through that in 2 years. If you think about how long it took the THC to get through their process, which is one of our developments. And then to get in the ground, which is what is going to be a challenging site because steep, forested, surrounded by salmon streams adjacent to the foreshore. I would imagine you're 2 to 5 years before you're seeing the first start to get built. That's a wild ass guess. It's the best I can do here, just thinking about how we worked in the past and where I know they're at the process. But it's not tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a question. Mr. Rogers, refresh my memory on, we've got a significant amount of non-revenue water. I mean, this at 100 cubic meters a day addition over 20 years. That's less than 5% increase really of our average daily demand. And it seems to me that we've got quite a bit of non-revenue water that we can take care of, which would eclipse that. So I'm just, I see both, maybe not recognizing last year was an outlier year, but also at the same time, not recognizing that we've, being very conservative, I guess, in what we could accomplish in the meantime. So I kind of see the 100 cubic meters as potentially very conservative. I'm personally looking at the data and reviewing it on my own. I think that we could probably add some, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, from the report in 2022, in Q3, which is our busy time, I think our non-revenue water is about 19%. I believe the Canadian average is 15% or so. So if we could get 5% below the Canadian average, call it 10%, we're looking at 2,400 cubic meters of water a day this year without any conservation. Like we're saying right now, use as much water as you can. So that would equate to 10% is 240 cubic meters if you could just improve it by 10%. And that's one way to do it, right? Operations. We haven't even got the test other new operations this year because there's been so much training. So we're actually holding more water back and spilling less is the intent. And so again, this is a conservative model using a non-conservative determinant in the 80s. I take your point.
Okay.
Only 2 more to go. So just a little bit of some considerations. All growth represents some risk. I would often say to the council, the whole, and the community, that our current water master plan, our current official community plan, and our current housing needs all assume some level of growth, but it's not controlled. So doing nothing is more risk than doing something at this point. Because right now, the OCP suggests we're going to grow at 2% a year. Don't enter that. The water master plan assumes that growth in its makeup as well. And so doing nothing is more risky than doing something today about this, whatever decision we end up making. 100 meters cubed a day, or a little more, I think, represents a manageable risk. We talked about at the last meeting that even 60 meters cubed is almost a no risk proposition because of the amount of flow that we expect to have in 2033 and the amount of demand that we would have under one of these situations. The LTG policy will be a living document. So as we talked about today, there may be some changes in terms of non-revenue water. We may have operational considerations. We may find additional water And so it's a document that would likely be updated fairly regularly. And because if we move forward with it, we're gonna be monitoring that water on a monthly basis at the very least, to understand where allocations are, that it will be something that we don't forget about very often. So final thoughts, is achieving housing reconciliation and OCP policy objectives worth closing down the highway for an additional 6 days in terms of risk? And what's the risk if we don't meet our OCP policy objectives? So what happens if we don't develop any more housing? What does our community look like then? And so we looked at risk in terms of risk to our water system, but there's also risk we think about not meeting some of our policy considerations in our main policy document, the OCP. And that's it for the growth. So far.
Okay, so I'll open it up to council for questions for Mr. Rogers, and I see Councillor Steer has his hand up right away, so I'll start with him.
I have no questions at this point, just comments in terms of direction towards what staff have been looking for. So I'll hold off in case there's questions, and then I can come back with comments.
Sounds good. Mayor Law?
Just, I have a question. I know in the back rooms, we've been chatting about what ifs and just to maybe assuage the fears is that, I know that Mr. Rogers and I just brainstormed and threw the idea of barging water in, which is entirely possible and not that expensive. So I just want to say once again, because that last slide was up there, that, closing the highway down for 6 days. There's a lot that can happen to prevent that we haven't even talked about. We haven't even sat down and had a good divergent thought process about what ifs. What if we had 10 days and it was looking pretty dire like last year, and what could we do? And I think there's other things that we could do too. So I just want to say that, this is a beginning process. I'm comfortable moving ahead even more than 100 cubic meters because I know of all of those things that are possibilities, and I know how effective we were last year. So maybe that wasn't a question, but a comment. Maybe a question for you is that just to round out the discussion for council, say, hey, look, this is a risk assessment, but it is not the full picture, and there's other potential mitigators, against closing the highway down just once again.
Yeah, this is a risk assessment. This is a tool to assess risk. It's talking about we use closing down the highway as the risk, because that seems to me the riskiest thing that could happen to this community in terms of reputation, people's livelihoods, businesses. We wouldn't run out of water because it's just, staff would not let you run out of water, so that's not the risk. But we needed some way to compare risk. So this is not about closing the highway. This is just about comparing risk.
Councillor Sawyer, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, it was a question just to understand that those numbers are based on residential growth alone, assuming that there's no commercial growth whatsoever.
The 100 meters cubed at this point is based on residential growth. When we get the policy in front of council next month, hopefully, we'll probably have some kind of questions in there for council to consider about other types of uses that either use or don't use a lot of water. This is primarily based on our conversations last meeting, our policy directions in the OCP, and then the units are up there are all purely residential numbers from current development queue and the District of 24 numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Did I see you have your hand up, Anderson, Councillor Anderson?
I don't know how to put this question. In the past, we had parts of the district that were didn't meet fire flow requirements for the type of and size of the development, and they were able to put in their own fire suppression tanks. And I'm just wondering if there are any kind of scenarios where a larger development could go ahead if they were able to source their own water, put in their own desalination plant, put in their own reservoirs. I'm not sure what mitigating factors that a development might come up with. but will there be any kind of leeway, or will that be something that would be discussed sort of off the side of limits to growth?
So limits to growth, it's a great question. Limits to growth is for us purely going to be about water volume, and it's going to be about supply. So fire flow is about distribution. And there are areas of town that don't have the right size pipes. If someone was developing a resort, we would ask them to upgrade those pipes to accommodate that. That wouldn't be about capacity, just basically, or supply capacity, which is what we're talking about today. Because we're only going to get water volumes in terms of, you know, whether we're going to get water or not. If a development came to us and said we can use desalination with the permits in place, we've got the environmental permits in place, and we'd have no problem with it because it's not cutting into that allocation. So we can build that, and it's likely we'll build that into the policy. If you can provide water in other ways, there's an option for you to move forward. You're just not necessarily going to get a chunk of the water that we've got reserved for X, Y, and Z.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor McMaster?
How much of this has been shared with TFN?
We haven't, I don't know if I forwarded them the report, and I think I forwarded them the risk report, but not necessarily this presentation, so.
Because, you know, as a comment, having read the letter, I feel uncomfortable determining limits to growth without having TFN on side.
Yeah.
Yes, through the chair. Thank you to all of council. I think we've been meeting regularly with the nation on the development on DL 124. And we've met as recently as a few weeks ago just to make sure that as we're having discussions with council on limits to growth, we're going back to the nation and having updated discussions. So our next step will be to meet with the nation again, talk about today's discussion before the policy would come forward to council in September.
So would you be prepared to change the recommendations to include TFN's agreement?
Thank you. I think that is a council decision that certainly will not rest with staff. We, you know, purposefully discussed today the development on 124. Staff did provide a recommendation to allow further growth. I think the next discussion on policy will allow for more detail, talking about typologies, bringing the discussion back regarding DL 124. If council would like to add additional language to the recommendation today, that is certainly within your purview, but staff's recommendation stands with the report that's provided.
Yeah, through the chair, just to follow up on that, I noticed in the report there was language that something about, and I'm sorry, my computer's gone black, but giving TFN, what does it say in there? If you can remind me, preference or something like that. It seems to me, you know, that you know, staff's recommendation of 100 cubic meters of water or a little bit more, that we could, you know, fully apportion what TFN would need over the next 20 years for their development of DL 124, and then, you know, rather than give them or you know, offer a sort of an overriding, you know, whatever happens, it'd be like, this is how much we're setting that aside, and that should be sufficient for 124. And at the same time, then we're dealing with residential development in Tofino at, you know, 50 or 75 cubic meters, and that's what we get. And there's a clear delineation, so everybody knows exactly what they're getting going forward, and there's no ambiguity. That would be my preference if we, you know, fulfilling our obligations to our neighbors and to DRIPA.
Which gets back to my point about getting TFN on side before we actually make a recommendation.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting discussion. Obviously, as a district, you know, staff person, I'm going to bring this forward to our council and mayor first. We are having those conversations with TFN, but I'm not going to change that order of operations after today's meeting. You know, whether we choose a number today or we don't, at least we know what we're talking about now. And now and I, when we meet with leadership from Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation in the coming weeks, we'll be able to bring this back. Because again, those numbers that I presented on that slide were an estimation based on some engineering from 5 years ago units. You know, our planning staff's estimation of what a certain typology uses, and some newer ideas of how much it would want. So that's a broad guess by your staff. I wouldn't want to pin that number down until I went to the nation and said, this is what we're thinking about. What does it look like from your side? Because I actually haven't seen a development yet there, so I definitely want to check in with the nation about that. I appreciate this discussion. It's a difficult one.
Yeah.
Councillor.
You said this is a living document, so I'm, I think that's a good point that Councillor McMaster brings up. But I think that the point that it's a living document and it'll be reworked, reassessed, we'll be diligent on looking for the non-market water and or whatever those leaks in the system. So to me, that satisfies me as long as we're having continuous talks with TFNs.
Councillor Steer, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you through the chair. I'm going to assume that we're past the question phase and have moved into comment. So I'll proceed at this time. Yeah, and I think you guys have touched on all the issues that I was going to bring up around. And I first want to thank staff for the report and thank you, Mr. Rogers, for defining risk and defining what the purpose of this presentation was. It was clearly articulated. And as has been presented as a living document, there was room for movement. So the gist for me was that you have considered as staff the risks as you defined, and you are providing a recommendation that is conservative in nature through your own conversations at 100 cubic meters. You've shown clearly the potential demand, and we know that those demand will take years to come to fruition, especially on some of those bigger projects. So I'm very comfortable with the recommendations that's there and that you have on the table to proceed at this time, with the ongoing knowledge that we have those continual conversations with TFN to address those concerns that were brought up in that letter. And I think this discussion around limits of growth and having a succinct policy with very clearly defined pieces in a living document will suffice in that in addressing that correspondence to council through TFN. So I'm very comfortable with this. I want to thank you for the report. I recognize it as a conservative estimate at 100 cubic meters. And once again, as a living document, we'll be reviewing this, as you said, on a very continual basis and those continual conversations with TFN. So I'll leave it there and thank you for the report once again.
Yes, Mayor.
One more question for me, comment question, 1.5. Can you, before we move on to debating how many cubic meters we're willing to direct staff to build a policy around, can you just explain for an overarching view of where this limits to growth policy sits in the water master plan? And I'm just going to ask that just because I've heard that why are we doing this when we should be just getting more water? So maybe just a quick overview.
Great question. The limits to growth sits within the water master plan. It's a little bit outside the water master plan, but it comes out of the water master plan. In that, the water master plan said you have no more water to use under the maximum day demand standard. And so as staff, we've been having that conversation with developers and community members about what the water master plan said. That's a bit of a shock for us to get. We all kind of expected it. But once we received that information in May, we moved towards deciding whether that was where we were going to stop with our growth, or do we think we have a little bit more room to grow? And that's what's brought us here today. Another offshoot of the water master plan was the source water assessment report, which we're currently working on side by side with this report. That council will expect to see probably late fall, but at this time, that goes out and looks at 8 different potential water sources other than what we have currently, and including what we have currently. It's gonna come back to council with some recommendations, some scoring criteria, and we're gonna decide as a community, we're gonna decide as council what the most appropriate way for us to move forward with that. Seeing some of these early drafts of those reports, nothing is inexpensive. And so whatever we do is gonna take some time and effort and resources that the District of Tofino doesn't hold on its own. One of our main partners in there, no matter where we go, will be the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation. It's no surprise to anybody that all the watersheds that we consider in Tofino are all Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, unceded Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation land. And so source water, again, will be part of this. It's the idea that we are looking to try to find a solution to this, but in the meantime, between that potential solution, we've got to manage the next 10 years. And that's what Limits to Growth does, is intended to manage the short to medium term demand and meet all our other policy objectives.
Thanks for that.
Is there any other questions or comments from council?
Why did you decide to just go to middle of the road at Almond?
I mean, for me, these are big, huge discussions. It's quite a range. I looked at the amount of days the highway might be closed. You know, that was our metric. And if it's already going to be closed 2 days, would have been closed for an additional 6, make a difference at that point. It's about a week of it being closed versus 2 days, and how do we make decisions? Again, there's no science to that. Once I actually did a slide that talked about demand after my recommendation. I didn't think about it until afterwards, and I didn't change my recommendation. Other than the graphics, maybe a little bit more. Maybe if you could accommodate both of those items. I also don't know what the true number is in terms of what the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation development may or may not be. And I don't know that all the developments that we have in our queue will currently go forward, either for a variety of reasons. And so it seemed like 100 was a safe bet. It was more than the 60 that we talked about at the last meeting, less than 200, but it's a range. I don't think I want to go much over 200 at this point. But again, it's something we could revisit in 3 years, or 3 years more data, and, you know, 3 years of more leak detection and 3 years of more of everything. And we just look at it, you know, as a community every couple of years.
What is the process for reviewing it on an annual, or?
Well,
I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
you know, the water master plan has driven this report.
Yeah.
What will drive those reviews, unless we, whatever, say that we need to review it and whatever?
I think it'll be 2 things. I think one, we'll write it into the policies. This policy shall be reviewed or should be reviewed on a twice annual basis, or whatever we decide to do as a community. And that's something when we bring that forward to council at draft, we can comment about that. Is it every 5 years, every 2 years, every 1 year? And the second answer is every time, once the policy adopted, every time we get a development application into council for a variety of development application types, there's going to be a water allocation question there. So it's never going to be, it's likely going to be its own heading in our reports moving forward once that's done. It'll just be talked about all the time. That'll keep it fresh in our minds, and then it'll just be up to that.
Sorry.
Just a comment to that and the living document nature. I'm kind of 2 minds on it, given that I think it's good if we're planning on addressing or reworking the policy to be reactive to changing environments and what our needs actually are, so that we're not stuck in something that doesn't serve us. But on the other hand, you know, I realize that it's something that will drive how we build in town and what applications we approve. And so I do want it to be something that's solid enough that people can plan 1, 2, 4 years out on, because you can't just wake up, hear that the limits to growth policy changed yesterday, and then put your application in and get it done in 6 months before the policy changes again. So I want to make sure that it's fair across the board for everyone who may be developing over the course of 5 years or 10 years, but still reactive. And I'm not sure if you can have it both ways, but I think that that's something I'm going to be very aware of.
I think it's a great point. It's possible, it's difficult, to like 5 or 10 years out, for example. But staff, in my experience, been working in the planning department for over a decade. These are the kind of conversations we have with developers on a weekly basis. And so if we heard wind of things changing in the planning department, we'd be like, people know as soon as we knew about it. So rarely are things a surprise for people. Yeah, I think I would just leave it at that. Maybe one other comment is that, again, this being a council document, it can be changed by council. Also, when you want, it's not a bylaw, also you need to notice motion, a discussion at council, but it is your document and it can be changed.
Councillor Anderson?
Certainly we've prioritized residential development and the report talks about that. There might be some development that's a combination of commercial and residential. And I'm just wondering, I sort of get it if it's a purely commercial development that, they might not get the development permit until, depending on the demand and something, but how are we going to deal with those sort of combinations of development?
It's my hope that the policy that I present to you in Superintendent's will have the beginning of that answer.
Okay.
Again, a lot of it is going to come from council. We're going to propose a draft policy that we expect will be discussed, considered. We haven't spent a lot of time to date on the commercial aspects of it, but that may be something that council wants to look at as a one-off type of thing. So you might have a process where, if it's a townhouse development or apartment development, we have a pretty basic process to decide whether you get water or not. It's just that if there's a commercial aspect to that property, either the scoring system or council looks at that separately, and we ask the developer to provide us with their estimated water use, and then we make a decision at council at that time. It's the policy is going to push housing and affordable housing first, for sure. And then when we get down to some of the uses that are less important to us, but still important, but less important in terms of the OCP, there'll be some policy around how we do that. We're never going to say no to anybody, a staff. We're going to say, here's our policy. You come to council with a permission to proceed report that says, I'd like to run a emergency restaurant and 3 units of penthouse apartments. Well, sure, that's what the policy says, and we bring the presentation to council. We're going to ask you for water usage on the restaurant, and we're going to ask you for water usage on the housing, and council is going to make a decision based on that policy. Likely, if you have those kind of conversations, that the application doesn't get past staff, but the applicant can see the writing on the wall.
Just follow up to that. It's also about the applicant and having some idea of how to proceed. It also, I think a scoring system might be provide some of the answers for prospective applicants. Okay.
It's very interesting that policy is your document, but it's still policy, and council can still make a decision as it chooses any which way, right? And so policy is there to be transparent and to help people understand that. But in the end of the day, council's decisions made from a number of different reasons, and not just this policy office will be important also.
So is there any other questions or comments? I was thinking maybe I would just kind of ask council what number they're kind of thinking with for the policy, or if we're comfortable with the motion.
I'm comfortable with the motion.
Councillor Sawyer? Okay.
Personally, I'd like to see 20 or 25 cubic meters added to cover both TFN's projected needs as well as development needs, and we've got infill needs as well. So I would like to see it bumped up a little bit, 120, 125. I'd be willing to make a motion to see if council was interested in that, but up to council.
I'm comfortable with the motion. How about you?
I'm open to Mayor Law's idea. And I would like to see some accommodations made for the TFN planned things. And I think the idea of having that, sorry, my voice is gone, having some of that dedicated to them, so there's no questioning kind of down the line of where these things are coming from. I'd also like to see, I know housing's a priority, but some sort of scoring system that does allow for commercial use in some sort of capacities. Because talking to people from some other communities over the last couple of months that are moving away from communities that have only built housing, they say they run into problems with like grocery store shelves running out, lack of places for, like, we have a lot of businesses, entrepreneurs in Tofino, let's say, and if we shut down the opportunities for people to kind of develop new ideas, then that could be shooting ourselves in the foot for more creative uses. But just some of those ideas rattling around here as we get deeper into it.
I'm in support of the limit to growth policy, but I feel a lot more comfortable if we have this hard conversation with TFN.
So,
Interesting.
oh, Councillor Steer, sorry.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with motion on the table, although I would not object to Mayor Law's suggestion of a small increase. I think that is worded within the, no, it's not, sorry. I thought it was worded within the motion that there was some wiggle room within that 100 cubic meter, but I'd be comfortable entertaining that increase that has been suggested.
Mr. Rogers.
The chair, you know, after listening to this discussion, again, I still think, you know, the 100, 125, 150 is kind of where we may want to end up. But I've heard enough tonight to know roughly where we are. And if we have the opportunity to go back and talk to Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation about those numbers, I feel more comfortable with this and bringing forward a number in that range to council for consideration at the next meeting. It would be one way to think about this.
Okay, so we could defer the motion?
I was just going to say something. I mean, I tend to agree with Mayor Law's suggestion, but assigning a number to TFN, I mean, the letter said we don't, you know, we want to do what we want. And I think if we pick a number, whatever number it is, whether it's right or wrong, I think they're just going to get tied down and probably be wrong in their eyes. So I think we need to have a discussion first to see where we end up.
Yes.
Just a comment. I just want to just reframe. This is about the total bulk cubic meters that council is potentially comfortable with. And then within that, then there's a conversation for TFN. So anyway, just to say, I'm comfortable with deferring and seeing what staff comes back and talking to TFN. There might be something going on there that we'd all like to hear.
I would feel happier with that.
I also feel like I would be happy with that, and I also agree with what Councillor Thomas said about having a bit of a balance of some, allowing a little bit of commercial, because I agree that to have a balanced community, that would probably end up functioning better. So how do we defer? I'm not sure. Do I just defer it? Yes.
Thank you, Chair Sloman. So I heard Mr. Rogers' comment that we've heard enough this evening to know where to go if we were to have a conversation with TFN. But just reflecting on Mayor Law's comment, this is about the overall risk that council is willing to consider in a policy. So if council was comfortable with a number, that will help guide our discussions with TFN. We can't have an open-ended amount of development with the current supply that we have. And I think that we all do understand and agree on that. So having a number to go have those conversations with would be helpful. It doesn't mean that is where we need to stick with in terms of a policy, and it does not solidify any language around the development related to Tla-o-qui-aht. Or the municipality. We can come back and work within that number still, once we finalize the language in the policy, the typologies, type of development we're willing to entertain. So if council did or could agree on a value tonight, we would take those back to the nation and have those discussions.
Well, if it was me, I'd just go with 100 number and see what happens after the discussions with TFN.
Through the chair, is it possible for council to provide a range, like 100 to 120 or something like that?
Yes, Councillor Fair.
Yeah, I'm comfortable picking a range of 100 and 120, realizing that if we are going to be still having ongoing discussions, we need to have something to talk about as a starting point before we do finalize things.
Okay, so I think then I will maybe read a motion and see if I get a seconder. So I move that the limits to growth policy of risk report be received for information and discussion, and that council directs staff to proceed with a policy based on 100 cubic meters to 120 cubic meters per day worth of raw water for development. Do I have a seconder? No? Oh, yes, Councillor Sawyer, all in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Is there any unfinished business? Okay, and then we move on to agenda item 10 for the question period.
Thank you, Chair Sloman. I will now make a call to the members of the public question. Both present in the gallery and participating online. For those in the gallery who wish to speak, please raise your hand. If there is anyone attending online via Zoom that would like to ask a question, please do so now using the Q&A function. Before making a comment, before asking a question, you will need to state your name, your address, and the agenda item you are speaking to. I will now do the calling once, calling twice. Through the chair, sir, if you would like to come up to the podium,
Good evening, my name is Jason Gordon. Just a technical quick question. So on page 165 of the Macmillan report, they start out as one of the parameters or constraints as using 90% of the reservoir. I wondered, is that the case for real? Like in the model, because models are extremely sensitive. Like even if it was 92 or 93, one peak, which is talked about a lot, here's the peak of our reservoir, and they state that they use 90%. And then the second thing it says, along the same lines, the slide titled ongoing actions that you presented to her, or through the chair to Aaron Rodgers. If ongoing actions are worth staff and council sanctioning, and there's history of ongoing actions too, shouldn't even conservatively a little bit of success to those ongoing actions be forecast? And including even by McElhinney, they can review some of what through over the last year or two and the proposed and the monthly actions right now. And it's only going to be 1, 2, 3, 4%, but in models like this, there's big differences made. Otherwise, it all seems very intelligent to me, and it's not out of line for us. Community, it's got lots of competing constraints and concerns, and so.
Do you mind repeating your question? I didn't quite follow it.
Okay, on a page on in the council summary staff report, I'd call it, for today's meeting, the McElhinney report stapled at the very end. And on page 165, I spoke of not of the McElhinney report, but of the whole council staff report. They state that one of their constraints is that the starting point is 90% of the reservoir. And I would suspect that there's a good answer, actually. These guys do this people do this for a living, but that's the question. That seems overly distorted, unless again, and I would even expect there to be a good answer, but it'd be worth following up on, because that's not necessarily, that's quite a serious safety constraint right off the bat. When we know it's going to repeat, it's going to spill over. That's part of the whole issue. There's not the ability to contain the water.
This is actually for council to answer, but I'm willing to, or sorry, I could probably give it a go unless,
Just before council does respond, yes, just a reminder that these are questions for council only, staff can't respond. If council's not comfortable responding to a technical question, because the answer will be public, staff do reach out to those that ask questions during these meetings to provide the technical response, but it is entirely up to council to respond if they wish.
Did that response also come to us as well?
Yes.
Marilyn, I think you had a response, did you?
well, I can give you a couple sort of general responses, and then we could probably, ask staff to get specifics for you, but just in context, the water master plan does say that according to maximum daily demand, we're deficient. We're deficient right now, and so this is by nature a very conservative,
Which is how you want to do it.
which is, so it's in some sense extremely conservative now, which I think we've noted, but so just, that's part of it. I see it because I looked at some of the things as well, and I was like, okay, I'm going to remind myself that this is a very conservative document for a reason, and then,
But if we know it's gonna go to capacity, that's part of the planning. I would, if somebody could follow that'd be excellent.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the reasons that we started.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Ilona.
Thank you.
The ongoing actions, was that a run up?
Pardon?
The ongoing action part, sorry, does that make sense to quantify that too, or is that hard to quantify and?
The ongoing actions is like dealing with non-revenue water, dealing with deficiencies, upgrading.
All the efforts.
Yeah, yeah.
that really helped get us to the last summer and are ongoing, and they're the latest and greatest, they're gonna have some effect.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
May
I'm sorry.
I? Yeah, I have a small amount of understanding on the technical side of things, but part of it is understanding that where the conservative estimates come from is when you dip below a certain point, there is a failure of systems. But then just looking to Google to explain things better to me, or better than I can. Reservoir capacity is obtained by finding the maximum difference between cumulative inflows and cumulative demand curves. So what goes into it and what we need is, gonna intersect, and that is what our capacity is. That's just one of the guidelines that are in there. Reservoirs and aquifers are different, but there is some similarities.
And in that read states, so it's intelligent to use a lower number?
It is that the capacity is not necessarily simply defined as the volume. It is looking at what it can do and what we need it to do. Although perhaps next meeting, if we're able to get more information, we could follow up with this for you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
There are no other questions at this time, Chair Sloman.
Okay. Then we will head into the closed session, and I will move the unanimous consent that like I said, move. Oh, sorry, it's been moved. Do I need a secretary to move it? Seconded by Councilman Master.
I move that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to section 91I of the Community Charter and discuss matters relating to receipt of advice that is subject to solicited client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose.
All in favor?
2-minute recess.
We'll have a 5-minute recess.